Welcome to this webinar on adapting for individuals, creating inclusive workforces in the era of hybrid working. I'm Siobhan Benita, I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which serves civil servants and public servants all around the world. I can see we've still got people joining, so I'm going to repeat the information. If you would like to use captions today, please click on the live caption icon, or we've sent a link in the chat function that you should be able to see there. So please use that if you will find that helpful today. Now, in terms of today's topic, the move to more home and remote working at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic was necessary to keep public services running during lockdowns. But actually, many government departments and organizations and individuals have found that reducing the number of days in the office has actually improved productivity and helped with work-life balance. So they aren't planning to go back to the old ways of working, but rather to move to a more hybrid future where we spend some time working from home, sometimes back in the office. But this approach doesn't come without its risks and its challenges, and organizations need to ensure that hybrid working arrangements enable dignified, safe, and equitable access for every employee, that people can still expect to have the support and the tools that they need to fulfill their potential, both at home and at work, and that issues of isolation and mental health concerns are not overlooked, and that everyone, whether they spend time present in the office or not, have access to training and promotion opportunities. And also it's going to be tough for managers because they're going to have to learn how to manage hybrid teams in a completely different way. We have an absolutely fantastic panel with us here today who are going to be discussing all of those issues, a lot more. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce the panel and invite them to give some opening remarks. But this is also your opportunity as our audience to put your questions to this panel. And you'll see when I introduce them, they really are a stellar panel. So please don't be shy. Put all the questions that you have to our panel using the Q&A button that you should have on your device. And we'll get through as many of those questions as we can before the end of the webinar. So you can send in your questions from any point from now onwards. So let me introduce our fantastic panel. First, we will hear from Luna Bengio, who is Senior Accessibility Expert at the Office of Public Service Accessibility at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. Luna provides strategic advice on a range of accessibility and inclusion issues, such as workplace adjustments, information and communications technologies, and culture change. She also contributes to several key initiatives, including the review of policies from an accessibility perspective and the development of the Government of Canada Workplace Accessibility Passport, which I'm sure we'll hear more about in a moment. Then we'll hear from Dr. Maynard Cbe, who is OBE, who is CEO of Microlink PC, one of the founding members of the Business Disability Forum Technology Task Force, the British Assistive Technology Association, and part of DWP's Disability Employer Engagement Steering Group. NASA has over 30 years experience working in the assistive technology sector and has received a host of awards and honors for services to people with disabilities. Then we will hear from Alice Maynard Cbe, who is Director of Future Inclusion and a non-executive director at the Financial Conduct Authority and HMRC. Alice helps leaders across public and private sector to improve organizational performance through inclusive practices. And where she sits as NED, she chairs the Remuneration Committee for the FCA, and in HMRC, she chairs the People Committee and the Government Commercial Office Remuneration Committee. And she's been a board member on large charities as well, overseeing everything from their governance to their strategic planning. Then we'll hear from Andy Garrett, who is Global Program Director at the Workplace Adjustment Service, GSK, where he is focused on enabling employees to request and receive the adjustments and accommodation solutions that they need to be their best selves at work, including working remotely. He's a member of GSK Global Disability Council and a founding ambassador for Purple Space. And then last, but by no means least, we'll hear from Michelle Fuco, who is Director of Talent and Performance Management at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Michelle joined EBRD in 2019 and is responsible for the diversity and inclusion strategy of the bank, where she's focused on enabling staff to bring their best selves to work. This has meant supporting staff through policy reviews, workplace adjustments, working, accessibility, and opening up the conversation on mental health well-being. So I'm sure you'll agree we really do have an amazing panel with us today. As I say, send in your questions at any point using the Q&A function. And if you would like to use the captioning today, please click on the live transcript icon or the link that's in the chat function. But without further ado, I'm going to invite Luna to give us her opening comments.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you, Luna.
Okay, great. Just checking. Good morning from Ottawa in Canada. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. I represent, of course, the Federal Public Service of Canada, which is a highly decentralized group of about 80 or 90 organizations at the best of times, with highly delegated people management authority. So each organization is basically responsible for managing their own people under a common set of general policies, just to situate the context. And before March 13th of 2020, the concept of remote, or what they used to call telework, was not very popular. You could get opportunities to telework if you were for reasons of workplace accommodation, and the ability to get those agreements, or those telework agreements, really was at the discretion of managers, and was very much a product of circumstances. So on March 13th of 2020, everyone, or most, the vast majority of the Federal Public Service, which is about more than 200,000 people, started working remotely. And we started realizing that, we were just getting prepared by implementing modern tools such as Microsoft 365, but not quite ready yet. And we were just realizing that we had to turn around and make sure that services to Canadians were to be maintained. So what did that mean for people with disabilities? I think a whole host of opportunities, because all of a sudden, remote or telework was no longer a question of, if I think you deserve it, I'll grant you. Or if I think that there are really good, strong, well-documented medical evidence, then maybe I'll grant it to you. Is all of a sudden everybody has to work from home, or mostly, and we need to adapt. And that's when people realized that workplace adjustments were not just for this group that was subject to what we call in Canada the duty to accommodate, which is an expression I really don't like, because it just focuses on compliance rather than on a positive or constructive approach. But all of a sudden, other people needed workplace accommodations, people whose little children were at home because no daycares were available, people who had all of a sudden to take care of family members, all kinds of situations where adjustments were necessary. And all of a sudden, I think that's a real opportunity that opened up for a recognition that not everybody works in the same way, and that a number of measures can help a whole host of people with broad range of needs to function and to be productive and to do what they can do and be at their best. So that's the positive. And over the last 2 years or more now, because we are still not fully back, and we are still deciding as a federal public service, what will a hybrid workplace look like? Have realized that there's opportunities, for example, for the public service to recruit outside what we call the Ottawa area or the National Capital Region. All of a sudden, people who are in different areas of Canada can access jobs that were typically based at headquarters. So those are all the opportunities that were created. The challenges, of course, are that as we were turning to this fully remote work, we were also exploring a number of options. For example, what we call co-working spaces, which are locations where different people from different organizations can just come for a day because it's closer to their home, for example, plug in their laptop and work away. So those are spaces that we started to explore. And that's where we started to think about, okay, so what does that mean for inclusion and accessibility? How do we make sure that these spaces are welcoming to people who function with different kinds of adaptive devices, or who have different needs, or who face different barriers? The other thing that we are realizing is during these last 2 years, we knew we were eventually going to come to a certain form of on-site work. But have we taken the time to adapt, to deal with the issues that we face that we were facing before around accessibility and inclusion in our workspaces? Did we take advantage of this time to make the changes? And how do we avoid returning to the good old way that if I don't see you in front of me sitting at your desk, then I don't know if you're really working? Yeah. That's the third thing. And the second thing is, how do we make sure in a hybrid environment that we include not just the people that are around us back and on site, but also the people who remain working remotely? How do we make sure we don't forget them? So those are all the questions that we are still
Thanks, Lena.
Going with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. I mean, that's a perfect way to set the stage in terms of the first presentation. And you've already had lots of questions coming in on the back of what you've said there. But really good to hear from Canada, as you said, lots of positives, actually, people shifting the conversation, recognizing that actually lots of different people need lots of different adjustments at home to make it work for them so that they can be their most productive selves. It's not just something that you have to do from a compliance point of view. You can have positive conversations about this, but also you've raised there, which I think a lot of the audience will connect with. Going forward, what's going to happen in terms of these co-working spaces, in terms of people who aren't so present in the office, maybe making sure those people don't get overlooked. Thank you so much, Luna. Before I come to NASA, I just want to mention Karen Tarico, who has said to all of you, this is a great initiative. You are giving us hope. And I would like to say thank you to the panel members as well, because I think that's a lovely comment from Karen there. Nasser, over to you.
Hi everyone. I am Nasser Siabi. I'm the CEO of Microlink. We've been in business of disability for 30 years, since 1992. We are what you can consider experts in all disability. So we understand disability, but we are not disability experts. What we do, we identify what disabled people struggle with to get on with the work they choose. We've been helping nearly 500,000 people in 30 years in higher education and in the workplace. And essentially what we do, we identify the challenges, the barriers they face because of their condition. So you can consider we are people who do personalization, make sure the work environment is so perfect so these people can overcome any problems they face because of their condition. And we also, we could be considered productivity gurus and or even talent recovery stars, because what we do is we find people who struggle with their condition, often do not get the opportunity or the the help they need in order to overcome the barriers, and they don't progress, they don't succeed. Sometimes they drop out of employment. Since the 2020, when people were sent home with a laptop and just that's it, you work from home, we found overnight nearly everyone became disabled. So that was like the first time we could have equity, equality, if you want to think of it that way, where disabled people wanted certain provisions they couldn't have because of all the problems that employers didn't really understand. Also, the people who really wanted to do their work, they knew what they had to do, they just didn't have the correct environment to work with. And what we have done in the past 2 years, we have a really high number of global clients. You know, some of them work in more than one country doing what we do for them. But essentially, they all reacted the same way. We don't really have anything for disabled people right now. If they had some provision before, if they're working from home, great. But if they don't, we're going to wait and see what happens, uncertainty. And so over time, they started realizing, okay, our disabled people, even in fact, some of our non-disabled people are not productive enough. So some started giving back what they had when they were working. Some decided, actually, here's some money, go and buy yourself anything you need in order to make your work environment better. And some also decided, hold on, we're going to have this hybrid working. So why don't we actually give you one working from home, one from the office? Really, I think the bottom line here is, how do I keep my employees productive throughout their working lives? That's not just about I can get more out of them. It's also keeping the employees engaged, keeping the employees motivated, and making sure you don't have conflicts where it often is the cause of a lot of the grief for the line managers trying to manage a productive team. So our approach to this whole thing is, you evaluate what the person can do, and do not worry about what they can't do, because what they can't do can be helped with a range of support and technologies. And thankfully, the thing we learned in the past 2 years, technology is such a great enabler if you allow it, if you stop restrictions, if you actually had given disabled people access to Teams or Zoom before the COVID, you'll find that a lot of them could be as productive or even more productive as your other colleagues and other employees. The second big amazing opportunity we've got is we've opened up the talent pool that wasn't available before. We've got neurodiversity is quite high on the agenda of every organization. We've got incredibly talented people could never get into employment because of the recruitment barriers, because of the things that really not relevant to your skill, your talent, but you had to do. And if you're someone who is autistic and who could do the job but didn't really know how to get through your hoops to get that job, now you can actually get the job working from home in your comfort of your own environment, but be a fantastic asset to the organization. So I think this hybrid working, the employers really need to start evaluating what worked, what made a person more productive, why would I need someone to come back to work? And if they're coming back to work, what can I do to make sure they continue to be as productive as they were when they were working from home? I discovered, I have a company with a lot of employees. We got much closer together because information is what employees need, not to be kept in the dark. And we found the tools, the technology as a connector between all the staff. We found that they needed things that we weren't aware of, and we ended up giving it to them. It didn't cost a lot because, again, most of it is in technology. Some of it is doing things differently. But what we found is an incredibly good, cohesive, motivated workforce that got us through probably the biggest challenge of our 30-year career. And so I think we've learned tremendous amount. We've also learned that companies now appreciate human beings are incredibly fragile. No support, no amount of cost will actually save you really high talented employees unless you actually found a way to make sure they become the best version of themselves at work. And that often comes down what adjustment does an individual needs, can I provide it quickly, and certainly the cost gets buried because the cost of not doing it is a lot higher than doing it. I think that's my piece ending.
Brilliant, thank you, Nessa. Building on what Luna said, really good that, I mean, you mentioned kind of the cost of doing accommodations and adjustments quite a lot. I think we will have questions about that. It's something that tends to come up in these conversations. But I love the way that you said you could describe yourselves and your company as kind of productivity gurus and talent recovery czars, because it's all about focusing on what people can do and how can we make sure that we can help people to be as productive as possible. Again, you mentioned talent pools. That's something Luna picked on as well. Has this helped us to broaden kind of where we recruit from and how we recruit? And then both, I think you and Luna have already touched on this sense of it took the pandemic maybe to get some employers to realize everyone has vulnerabilities and is fragile in some way. And actually that maybe has shifted the conversation. So thank you so much, Nessa. I am now going to invite Alice to give us her thoughts.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Hello, everybody. So I want to focus on culture. That's definitely one of my spheres of interest. And when the pandemic lockdown started, we switched to visual. That is, those of us who could. There was a lot of chatter on social media about how much more inclusive it could be. Then everyone started worrying about mental health issues and working differently in the visual space. And I wrote a piece myself about not being able to pick up the real world and deposit it without change in the virtual world. And I spoke with a voice of experience because my 8-hour board meetings suddenly turned into 8-hour on-screen board meetings with very few breaks. And that's exhausting. Chairs who had not necessarily been brilliant at managing meetings in the real world lost the plot. Boards and committees overran, breaks were cut down so that people didn't have enough time. And I particularly felt that, given it takes me 15 minutes to go to the toilet, it's really complicated. And companies' virtual private networks overloaded and the flow of discussion was interrupted. And for those who had difficulty following conversations because of a hearing impairment or a learning difficulty or something, that could be extremely disruptive. But there were positives. So people needed to spend less time commuting. That helps with energy levels, so they could put more into their work, and it helps with the daily battle with accessibility in the public realm. And those of us who are often invisible in meetings or more introverted and reluctant to interrupt could raise a digital hand. That's much easier. A colleague who lip reads commented on how much easier it is to do that when you've got the speaker's face right in front of you. Of course, that's provided they don't have their camera turned off, are not sitting in front of a window where the light makes them look as if they're in witness protection, or their face is obscured by their cat. Who thinks about whether somebody might be lip reading when we decide how we want to show up at a meeting? And now we've gone hybrid. Before, we really learnt to be virtual inclusively. And again, that provides many opportunities for more human working practices, but they're not going to come naturally. We're going to have to work at it. The way we structure work, the way we manage teams, the way we ensure everyone is in the information loop, access to technology, all this has to change. And not by monitoring staff to ensure productivity. Many organisations have a very precarious trust relationship with their staff anyway, and a lack of understanding about what exactly constitutes productivity hinders trust. And frankly, it even hinders a good monitoring system if you believe that such a thing really exists, because we would be measuring the wrong things and of course getting the wrong outcomes. Some of the positives for hybrid include people being able to work where they want to if they're in that sort of job. But sometimes those of us who can work virtually forget those who can't, bus drivers, nurses, shop floor colleagues, etc. If you work on the phone lines, taking confidential calls, and you live in a shared house without reasonable working space, working out from home is unlikely to be an option. And this can make for a very exclusionary public dialogue. And where distinctions exist within an organisation, and exclusionary culture. Maybe all Airbnb's jobs can be done remotely, but Nando's definitely can't. Even for those who are able to work remotely if they choose to, it's harder to ensure that they're not overlooked for special projects, manager attention, the things that enable development in a non-formal way. Without someone in front of you, as already been said, it can be easier to let them become a paper cutout or a character from a film in our thinking. It can be out of room, out of mind. If we want our culture to be inclusive, working out how to remain engaged and enable those working remotely to remain engaged is a really vital step. Yes, there is technology that can help, but technology is only as good as its user. And if users, managers and leaders quite often, don't understand the importance of or are not capable of using it well, it's not going to help. Then there's the ongoing presence of COVID. COVID can be an excuse, but it can also be a real issue for our people. Some don't feel confident to come back to the workplace because of their own health or that of close family or friends. So when will that fear go? Who knows? If we can use this experience to ensure that we all consider our colleagues when we're not well, the world will be more inclusive. But this will require leadership from the top and constant communication internally. Finally, from me, from a UK perspective, something slightly out of left field and very personal, people who need support at work in the form of a human being, and you've recently seen one behind me if you were looking, may find it much more difficult when they work from home. The bureaucracy involved in the UK in getting what we call access to work for a support worker is complex. And it may be impossible to get sufficient funding if your circumstances change. But the system needs to adapt to people, not people to the system. So all the things I've spoken about are about people, behaviours, and sensitive, confident, and courageous leadership. It's so critical for leaders to get this right, and it's not easy. We mustn't be afraid, even if we're leaders, to seek advice and assistance if our workplaces are to be inclusive and to thrive. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alice. I mean, so much in what you said there that I'm sure we'll unpick in the conversation afterwards. But I think the overall message that I take away is you can't just shift real life to online and think it's going to work. You really need to work at this. You really need to see, is everybody benefiting from this? Everybody getting the support they need to be able to work to the best of their abilities. The issues I think that we've touched on already about the risk of people getting overlooked if they're not present in the office might be deepened going forward. And that real challenge there for leaders, that leaders have to step up and they have to be showing the right way going forward. Thank you so much. There is so much in there that we will come back to. Thank you so much, Alice. Andy, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Andy Garrett. I'm a pale-skinned male in his late 50s with light brown hair, coming to you from my homework setting, a hybrid worker. I've been with the global pharmaceutical company GSK for around 5.5 years. Delighted to be involved in this panel today about public service as well. I spent 30 years in UK policing. From that perspective of trying to make accommodations and adjustment in that complex environment, just as complex in different ways as a global multinational pharmaceutical company. Other hats that I wear at GSK, I'm a co-lead of our global employee resource group network, and in my introduction, I'm an ambassador at Purple Space. Been working with disability networks for a long time. And of course, we've been advocating long before the pandemic about the potential and the need for people to have flexible and hybrid remote work options and to be equipped for success. Of course, COVID's proved that so many employees, and of course not all roles, can be trusted to work remotely and in hybrid settings if they're equipped properly for doing so. You just can't expect employees to work, long term just with, a laptop balanced off a domestic table. You've got to think about when you're designating that setting as a workplace, you've got duty of care to make sure you've got the appropriate ergonomic provision. So that you're not developing, risk of musculoskeletal conditions, developing, mental health and well-being, as well as physical health and well-being, thinking about people, who may be lone workers. You've got to think about the range of space in employees' home settings. You know, I'm sitting here, I'm very fortunate I've got a sizable office that I can dedicate to workspace. Not everyone has that, particularly during the pandemic. They might be balancing homeschooling, they might, you know, shared space. You know, people's range of work settings is wide. We've got to be really conscious that we respect that. And, you know, even to the point of thinking about, you know, do people have Wi-Fi bandwidth? You know, the energy crisis and the cost of working at home. I know there are savings from not traveling to the office. And of course, competing distractions, you know, whilst we're working. As people said with the cat, you know, charging across the screen. But we really got to be careful to ensure that we support appropriate boundaries around hybrid working, not just working on site, but on a few days at home. You know, we're not living in the office. We've got to be respectful of people's time. And it's been mentioned by other speakers about time in between meetings. Sorry, excuse me. So yeah, there are regulations around people that use display screen equipment in many markets and equality. But of course, we have to decouple this subject from disability alone. You know, it's about equipping, you know, for us at GSK, our model for workplace adjustments is open to anyone in our organization, and particularly those with an injury, health condition or disability. You know, we don't put that pre-qualifier with all its complexity about who is disabled enough to justify needing X or Y solution. For us, it's not a compliance piece. This is about productivity and enabling people to thrive. And of course, with the work environment that people are going into, we've got something called an inclusive design specification for our built environment. But of course, we've now worked with our global facilities providers to make sure that our supply chains can now support people with the ergonomic solutions that they need at home. And that might just be, you know, a proper desk and chair to work from. And of course, and we've set stipends in each country so that you can order those things at home. But of course, if you do have an injury, a health condition, disability, you know, standard catalogs, you know, don't necessarily have all those things. That's why we partner with Microlink. We have My Service Line, the workplace adjustment service, so that if people do need a specialist solution, a software, an ergonomic item, whatever it might be that isn't available in standard catalogs, we make it easy for people to access that, because that is about making them productive in the jobs that we want them. Of course, in the home setting, but not just in the office setting, we have lab environments and we have manufacturing environments where some people do have to go onto site as well. We've got to be very mindful of that diversity amongst our people and put the supply chains and processes in place to equip them for success, to enable them to thrive. So that's why I'm keen on decoupling this concept that specialist workplace adjustment solutions are only the premise of people with disabilities. That's not the approach we take, because you can need an adjustment or an accommodation long before you might qualify under some legislative program as having a disability. And of course, thinking about as people return to the office from the pandemic and the home working setting, we cannot allow our facilities providers and our estates teams to revert to the one-size-fits-all model. Yeah, people still may need their accessibility solutions for those 1, 2, or however many days they go to site. So thinking about costs, and you know, we've proved that the costs of supporting people for productivity through workplace adjustments is often low, and actually below £1,000 in most of our, you know, as an average in most of our cases. So it's not expensive to equip people for success. So we're not letting our FM providers revert to that. We've still got to provide for that accessibility. But of course, if you are reducing your estate because we have less people using our sites, that might seem a great opportunity to cut the budget for the estates team. Yeah, it might do, but maybe think about investing those savings in the processes that you have to equip people for productivity wherever they work. And of course, then investing as well in your digital accessibility channels, because that won't just enable more employees to be more productive, it will make your organization more accessible to more customers. And of course, you can be flexible in terms of when you expect employees to travel when they're in a hybrid work setting. Could they travel, outside of traditional rush hours when it might be cheaper and less busy?
Yeah.
So flexibility is the key there. And I'd really like to pick up on that point lastly about culture, that we really need to train our managers and our facilities providers to think about inclusion in these terms. That accessibility is not those few people we may have thought about that were people with disabilities. We've got to equip everyone for success. But I'm really looking forward to the questions that come later.
Thank you so much. I mean, again, loads of ideas in there, but I think, again, some themes emerging here. So everybody's going to be different. Everybody is going to need kind of different accommodations, different adjustments. We need to think completely holistically and inclusive. Inclusivity, really, really important there. But another issue that's come out, this is not about compliance, not about doing the minimum that the kind of laws require us to do. This is about doing what will help everybody to be the most productive self at work. I like what you say in GSK about how you've made it easy for people to get the support that they need. Model there. And again, touching, I think you went back to something that Luna said, is have we really thought through what we want our offices of the future to be like? Have we taken that opportunity to rethink the way we use our office spaces so they're inclusive for everyone? Thank you, Andy. And last but by no means least, Michelle, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Fuco. I'm the Director of Talent and Performance Management at EBRD, and my team includes the D&I team. EBRD is an international development bank which draws our staff from both the public and the private sector, and we're based in a number of countries across most of Europe, parts of Central Asia and the CEMED region. But our main HQ is in London, where we have about 2/3 of our colleagues based in London. And I'm by no means going to sort of say that we're the best in class at anything. We're not. We're on a journey, we're learning as we go, and we recognize there's a lot more that we need to do. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about our D&I approach and where we find ourselves at the moment in our journey around our approach to bettering inclusion for our colleagues with disabilities. Our D&I strategy in particular over the last 3 years has been to focus more broadly on rather than just gender and nationality is where we started, and we've tried to broaden the discussion to include all areas of D&I and include and better understand awareness, understanding, consolidate policies, increase the conversation around broader D&I. And in particular around the inclusiveness for our colleagues with disabilities. As you can imagine, that would be completely different in all of those locations within which we're based. So you're not going to have the same conversation in all of those locations. As a bank, we find ourselves at a particular point in our journey at the moment, and I sort of called it, I think I'd call it a fork in the road, because of two opportunities that we find that we want to use and leverage off to get ourselves further along in our journey. One of those is actually COVID. We found that during the remote working, 2 years of remote working, it feels such a long time ago now, but 2 years of remote working increased the awareness around visible and non-visible disabilities for us. That includes, for example, awareness of our neurodiverse colleagues, but also, as became increasingly aware, and I heard this earlier, as part of the pandemic, mental health. We found that it's easier sometimes when you are constantly pre-COVID, sort of seeing people, you can see when things might be wrong. When you're remote working, it's harder, and there's much more of a responsibility on managers and teams to be aware of things such as well-being, mental health, and the impact that the pandemic and work might be having. And that meant that as we were in that sort of period of COVID, there were a number of things that we did, which I've heard already previously around the workspace at home. So we too had an allowance for staff that they could use in order to make sure that they could purchase the right equipment for their home environment. As well as that, we had etiquette rules of how you work and engage with people to make sure that hours didn't seep into really, really long hours. And also training for line managers about working remotely, but also workplace adjustments. But for us, the biggest impact for COVID was around the increased focus on mental health. And really what that meant about well-being, whether or not it was a result of the pandemic or not. So that meant that we increased the amount of line manager training and staff. We introduced mental health training for managers. We also introduced a mental fitness app and one-to-one coaching, accessible to whoever wanted to sign up. It's not mandatory, it's voluntary, as well as topical webinars on many varied health issues. As well as that, sort of increasing our listening approach. So we had a lot more pulse surveys, and we would focus the questioning particularly on mental health and well-being. But we found that there's been a real paradigm shift in the way that we've worked because of COVID. And we, like many other organizations, are moving to a hybrid model of 3 days in the office and remote working. And now we're trying to sort of see how best we can make that work for us from that perspective. The other shift that we found, which we think is an opportunity, is that we are moving our HQ. So we're currently based in Liverpool Street in London, and we're moving to Canary Wharf later on this year. And as part of that, we've found that in our current environment, we don't think that it has the accessibility. It doesn't. For all of our staff, it doesn't. So as part of the build towards moving to the new staff, at least for our HQ, and we will take the learnings for the rest of our resident offices, we wanted to be able to design in inclusion as much as we could from a physical perspective. And our HQ was a new build, so we were able to do that and work with the project team from the onset. So that meant sort of, for example, being able to include induction loops in meeting rooms, task lighting to all workstations so that lux levels can be adjusted, ergonomic chairs and height adjustable desks, sound masking so that adjustments can be made to the acoustics, as well as a wellness suite, which includes sensitive rooms for staff who require cooler working environments and a quiet space. And the idea with the project team is to achieve a well-building platform rating in our new office for when we move in the summer of this year. But I think it's really a focus to make sure that if we're talking about spaces, we're talking about the office space as well as the remote space, and to make both as accessible as possible. The last thing I'd like to say around what we're sort of doing is this year at the Global Disability Summit in February earlier this year, we for the first time made some public commitments around accessibility for our offices, accessible meetings and events, further training, awareness raising, and public commitments to what we were going to do. And for us, that was a big thing. It's the first time we'd gone out publicly to do that. And we continue to get advice from our partnerships with the Business Disability Forum, Purple Space, but we're really trying at the moment to better our data. So on a completely sort of voluntary way, and this is not just around our colleagues with disabilities, but for all D&I, we're trying to better our data, and we're going on a voluntary data collection so that we can better target some of what we need to do and the way in which we're doing it. And on that, I hope I've kept that to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Michelle. You did. That was perfect. Thank you so much. I mean, that's a fantastic way to end our opening presentations. Really interesting to hear from your perspective, because you straddle, as you say, the public and private sector and have so many different locations around Europe. But just, I think, highlighting what you said there around COVID in that period increased the awareness of visible and non-visible disabilities. So I think there has been a real shift in focus on mental health, well-being, but also, as you say, neurodiverse colleagues as well. That's something I know the panel and the audience will be interested in. But one thing that really struck me, what you said, is that you have listened more and really gone out to capture feedback from your staff. And I think this loops back to something that NASA said, which is actually this, although we were remote working, this period actually drew a lot of us closer together. We got more information about everybody than maybe we had when we were all working with each other side by side in offices. And really good that you have touched on looking at office spaces going forward. You've got that opportunity to design in inclusion and that public commitment to being better going forward. So thank you so much, Michelle. We have got so many questions coming in. I want to get to those in a moment, but very quickly, I just want to put one question back to the panel because it came up in quite a lot of your presentations. And I know our audience are overwhelmingly public servants. They're sitting in civil services around the world. Budgets are going to be tight. Their line managers are going to tell them there is no money for any of this stuff. What would you say to people who basically are told the cost of adaptation, the cost of accommodation is just too high? We'd love to do it, but we can't. Andy, I'll come to Mo, but I'll go to NASA first because we haven't for a while.
I think if they come up with that, they are ill-informed about the cost of not doing that adjustment today. Costs are hidden in terms of tribunals and legal challenges, in terms of absenteeism, in terms of presenteeism, in terms of losing your talent and you have to recruit. When we've done the analysis and we know for every dollar you spend in putting in accommodation, you will save $10 if you do it properly. It is really not just a number. We've done the calculation and it's done based on thousands of surveys we've done with employees that we've helped over the past 10 years, and we always consistently get the same result. Absenteeism reduction by 80%. A retention engagement score is just the highest measure where a company is productive and is going to be successful. The engagement score between the disabled and non-disabled people is the narrowest in the companies who do the best. They are the best practicing. And that is actually pounds and shillings or dollars in a global sense. So I think, yes, if you do look at the cost of not doing it, then you'll find it outweighs the cost of fixing. And the second thing Andy said, the cost is very often below $1,000, equivalent to 2 days of absence from work if somebody stopped. So you're not talking about mega bucks, but if you do it properly.
Thanks, Nessa. Andy, you wanted to come in on this, I think.
Yeah, I'd just really like to advocate the benefit of investing to save, because having a process, when you're looking at the cost, the perception amongst budget holders is, well, we're spending a lot of money on just a few people. Rubbish. You're investing good value in equipping many, many more of your people for success, thinking beyond visible disability, thinking about less visible and non-visible disability. And of course, it's a productivity driver. If you're giving people, I don't know, speech to text software, that improves your information processing for anyone that uses it, regardless of whether they need it for a learning difference or some other aspect. So I think it's a misnomer to say that it's just too expensive to work to do. You've got to do it for your legal duties, for equity and inclusion, but it's actually worth doing because it's not, we've proved that in our model now, 5 years in at GSK, that we, whenever we have those conversations about costs, we can bust those myths out the park because it's actually quite cheap in the round to give people the things that they need to be successful and to thrive. And it really builds trust.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Luna, in your work across the Canadian public service, does this issue of cost come up a lot?
Definitely, it does. One of the things that Andy, I believe, said is if you if you remove the responsibility of paying for accommodations from the line manager, and you have an easy, smooth process for ensuring that people have what they need, and we have examples of those models, it's been proven that things work well. Employees are happier. Managers can get to what they need to do. They don't have to worry about the paperwork that it is to, for example, procure a piece of software. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are so many adjustments that cost absolutely nothing. If you provide somebody a transcript of a meeting because you've just enabled the transcription function in Teams, for that person, it makes a world of difference. For you as the manager or the host of the meeting, it's just a 2-second gesture, right? So it's that, and that's what we have to focus on, is the benefits, the positives, the difference that it makes for all kinds of people.
Yeah, thanks, Luna. Michelle, you're obviously bought into investing in this, given what you said about the HQ, but do you find that's different in your different locations?
It is different in the different locations, and I called it earlier, an opportunity of the HQ. If we didn't have that and it wasn't a new build, then we too would have been in a similar situation for in that instance. But it's definitely something we find in other locations. I think for us, though, one of the things that we've been trying to do is something similar to GSK, actually, which is trying to centralize. I was listening avidly, Andy, to everything you were saying, trying to centralize requests so that the cost aspect isn't the thing that people think about. I'm going to be quite sort of controversial and say, actually, we get probably more people not realizing that somebody might have a non-visible disability and actually not be aware that that they could make a request for something, or for an individual to be able to sort of speak up and say, I need X, Y, and Z, and that's where we focused our attention. I don't think that particularly answers your question. It is an issue for us, but it's not the biggest issue, right, I would say. I think on some of our resident offices, we do assessments whenever we move to a new office, just to understand around sort of accessibility. Yeah. But for us, there are other issues such as just sort of the cultural context within which that office exists, and the support and the awareness of that sort of office in that location might be a bigger issue in that instance.
Thanks, Michelle.
Just one additional point. You could train a lot of managers to do it badly.
I'm just going to go to Alice on this issue, but Alice, I left you to last on the issue of cost, because I want to ask you if it's come up as your role as a NED, like is this something that you've experienced? But also Mark Howard has asked a question specifically around the role of non-exec directors. So he said, how do we get the message to non-exec directors that they're in their role in advising boards in understanding this matter is of utmost importance? Is that something that you see as part of your NED role as well?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a real drive in both the organisations that I'm a non-exec director on to ensure that our culture is diverse and inclusive. That doesn't mean we're a bit like Michelle, you know, we're not there yet by any manner of means. But I think one of the ways that you can get non-execs to focus on this is to ensure that there is some board time allocated. And in order to do that, I mean, certainly in most organisations, I think it would be a case of going up through chief exec and chair of the board. One of the ways to get people who might not have much idea about this to think about it is to actually help them to understand that everybody gets adjustments anyway. So there was a great person in the US called Susan Daniels, who used to work in the Social Security bit for Bill Clinton, who used to say, who talked about adjustments being the kind of things like electric light for people who actually have some vision, and seats. I don't ever need a seat when I go anywhere. I take my own with me wherever I go. So I'm very cheap actually, because all these office chairs in every single meeting room and every single desk space, I don't need them. You could save a bucket on that if you wanted to. So it's that kind of understanding that adjustments are only adjustments because of the way that the world is structured. But on the actual thing of the cost of adjustments, no, it hasn't come up to board. It may be that people in the organisation, managers in the organisation, are saying, oh, I don't know about this, it doesn't come in my budget. But that's certainly not the discussions that we're having around the board table. But I think one of the things is that, you know, as Luna said, the technology now allows you to be much more inclusive in all sorts of ways. There's all sorts of things that enable you to be more inclusive. And this is back to my culture thing, it's a mindset. Yeah. And if people do the stuff that doesn't cost because they think it doesn't cost, they'll get into a mindset that says, oh, okay, so maybe we actually could, if, you know, we've seen this result from doing something that doesn't cost, let's actually try investing, like Andy says, investing in it.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Andy, I know you're keen to come in, but we've got so many questions, so I'm going to put
it's just very brief. I just wanted to say you could, you know, managers will spend a lot of time going around the houses and a lot of energy, maybe not managing the process well. Train up a small number of people as specialists to do it well. Partner with a good specialist organization like we have with Microlink, and it becomes much more efficient. And then you get the metrics to prove its value.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So I'm going to go to questions from the audience because we've got lots coming in. The first one from Claire Taylor. Claire has said, are there any guidelines or guidance on how to make inclusive meetings in hybrid working? So if most people return to the office, but you still have to work from home, I think this goes to your point, Alice, that you mentioned for some people, COVID might still be an issue in terms of returning to the workplace. What etiquette rules can we use to ensure that you can fully participate when it's harder to hear and see all that's going on and it's hard not to feel left out? And I think this comes back to, again, training that managers are going to need as well for managing kind of hybrid meetings. Michelle, I'm going to come to you first for your thoughts on this one.
So this is one we're still learning on, because I think it's harder to do the hybrid as opposed to when you're all remote working, and then you've got the etiquette rules as to how to approach that. I think there's two pieces here. There's the technology to be able to support the hybrid being able to work appropriately, and the rules around the use of that. We're still finding that people will just bring our laptops so that we still speak to the the screen, so that we're able to talk to each other individually, even if some of us might be in one location and others might be in lots of different other locations. There is the piece around being able to make sure that don't assume where people are going to be, set everything up as if everybody's going to be 100% remote working, and then see how the meeting, see who is where when it happens to be, so that you're not sort of starting to indicate that people need to be at particular places at particular time. But it's really around the behaviors in the meeting and the giving the space to be able to speak and to speak up, being able to understand who's not speaking and who isn't, being conscious of bias and the same things you would in a room. Are you letting the loudest in the room speak or the loudest via technology speak? But we're not there yet. We're just sort of pulling together as much as we can. So for me, I can't fully answer that question, but that's the route we're taking.
Yeah, thanks. We're still on a journey on that one. Nasser, I could see you were nodding there to some of the things Michelle was saying. Your thoughts on managing hybrid meetings?
Well, actually, we've learned a lot of good practice to respect every participant when it comes to remote. There is no reason why we can't follow the same principle in a face-to-face with hybrid. And obviously, etiquette is something that is a common sense. It's not like a new science. You respect people's opinion, give them a chance, a platform to speak out, and here you can do. But what's the biggest, I think, innovation we've had in the past 2 years? The use of captioning, the use of technology so that people who can actually be in a meeting can actually hear everything everyone is saying. And what you're doing today with your captioning actually not only enables people who are hard of hearing, it can enable people who are autistic, and it can even help those people who are in a busy, very noisy environment. They can actually still follow what we're saying. So that itself is a best part of the accessibility that is actually going to help every individual to contribute to a very productive meeting.
Thanks, Nasser. Interesting what you say, and I think a lot of people have said this technology, that if you put it in by default, it can help everybody. There are benefits for everybody, not just people with disabilities, I think. But Alice, I want to come to you on that, because you interjected a word of caution on technology, I think, in your opening presentation. So in terms of managing hybrid meetings, where do you see this going?
I interjected a word of caution, largely because of people's inability to use it well. And one of the things that we do is, same as Michelle, we have everybody on screen. If some people are on screen, everybody's on screen. Or actually there's a magic camera in the middle of the room that moves according to who's speaking. And that's quite useful. My sense about this is that you can never substitute for asking people. Provided you know who's going to be in the meeting, then it's important to ask them what works best for them. Sometimes I think actually it would be better if people were all on camera or all off camera or whatever, but there may be some people who really never want to be on camera. And as long as that doesn't interfere with other people's accessibility needs, then I think that's fine. But if it does, then just like in the public realm, where you often have to negotiate between people's access needs, then you're going to have to do that negotiation with your team or your group or whatever it happens to be. Yeah. So my first thing would be ask.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Luna, do you have any thoughts on kind of managing hybrid meetings?
It's been an interesting experience for those of us who have gone back on site to figure out how you actually can have the hybrid meeting using your laptop, but still people around you in the room. How do you manage the noise? How do you manage the technology? We all of a sudden we're kind of improvising a little bit. We don't know how to make sure there's no echo or there's no extra noise that comes in. And I think Michelle said it. We're on a journey. We're going to learn, just as we learned how to manage these fully virtual meetings better, and how to bring in everyone and how to recognize different styles. I think we'll start to learn, and the technology will adapt as well.
Thanks, Una. Andy, do you have any etiquette rules in place in GSK for hybrid meetings? You have to unmute, Andy. Sorry.
A little bit like some others, it's a journey for us. We're trying to look, well, we are looking at the meeting etiquette, the rules. We quite often in meetings will have, roles, who's going to be the chair, who's going to be the minute taker, who's going to be the timekeeper. And something we're adding to that now. We're asking people to, you have observers, you have that as a role, but to ask that what's the inclusion moment? Whether it's at the top of the meeting to remind people about inclusion principles, or also at the close of the meeting, inviting people to share either openly or offline whether they felt the meeting was well run in an inclusive way. So it does come back to developing the culture, and our skills, really. The more skills we can have to be mindful of different people's perspectives and needs.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Well, that leads us on nicely to the next question. And I'm going to take two questions together because Julia Hunt has sent in two questions. One leads on the issue, I think, of changing cultures. And she said, how can we encourage teams to consider that inclusion is everybody's responsibility. So not just the role of the designated inclusion officer. She's saying some people don't think there's a problem. Some people would like to be inclusive, but don't know where to start and they're scared of getting things wrong. So that's the first part of Julia's question. The second question she sent in was, which I really like, how can we encourage informal water cooler style chats in a hybrid setting? So I think it's that issue of maybe are we losing out with that social contact when people feel less connected? And she's saying people are scared to kind of contact colleagues for those kind of conversations because they think they're all super busy now working from home or in a hybrid setting. So those two issues, you can answer one or both of those things. Luna, I'm going to come to you for your thoughts.
I'm going to pick up on that point about how can we make sure we know it's everybody's responsibility. Definitely that's always part of the message that I keep repeating to people. We can all do something. Reach out, listen, ask questions, inform yourself. But there are so many things that we can do. If you take the time to look at, for example, look at your documents that you produce and make sure they're concise, make sure you use plain language, make sure you don't use these acronyms that we're so fond of in government. Well, you've improved, you've made a gesture towards inclusion without even knowing. And that we can all do. It's trying to get people to understand that it's not about that group of people on this side, it's about all of us. And as our Deputy Minister, Yasmin LaRoche, is very fond of saying, this disability is the one thing that does not discriminate. It can happen to anyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Una. I've heard NASA say a similar thing to that as well many times before. Andy, you were nodding there to what you were saying.
Well, I'll certainly echo that point. You know, disability comes into any of our lives at any point. I developed my central field vision condition, halfway through a policing career, and it took me in a very different direction, but in a very rich and rewarding way, as it turns out. But absolutely, I think really we've got to think more about how do we engage people to think about inclusion. I think it's an opportunity, by making inclusion for everyone, it kind of stops it being just about those people with a protected characteristic. Because when you think about protected characteristics, people might start walking on eggshells and worrying about saying the wrong thing, and I think that's maybe one of the learnings from this experience of the pandemic, that inclusion is something that impacts us all. And of course, with the disability lens, remembering that disability can come into people's lives at any point. So doing the right thing now might be the right thing that you need at some point later in your life. So hopefully it makes it a bit easier to talk about.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks. Alice, did you have any thoughts on is this everybody's responsibility, but also that kind of water cooler moment? How that doesn't get overlooked in a hybrid future?
I think people have covered the everybody's responsibility. So I'm going to step into some really tricky waters and try and talk about the water cooler moment. Actually, it's easier to talk about the second bit of that, which is that people are scared of contacting colleagues. And I entirely understand that issue. As a non-exec director, you're not in the organisation even. So you're not on the Teams bit where you can send someone a message or something. I think one of the things, so I have a similar issue with my PAs. I have a team of PAs and, personal care assistants. And I used to worry about contacting them about my needs, or, can you do this, or can you come for that? Because I never knew what they were doing and I didn't want to interrupt something important. So what I found was messaging was really useful. And I would suggest that messaging people and saying, I need to talk to you, are you busy? Sounds really simple, but if you do that, then they can answer or not answer. But if there are some principles laid down about, you know, someone might message you at 6 o'clock in the evening. If you're not available at 6 o'clock in the evening, don't answer it. It's fine. That normal thing about, you know, you get on the bottom of people's emails nowadays. I'm sending this now because it's convenient for me. Don't answer it if it's not convenient for you. It's that kind of thought. The water cooler moments are much harder. And they're easier, I think, if you have that technology where you can just kind of drop in. But otherwise, you've got to set them up. And one of the things that we haven't sorted yet, in my experience, is how you get that informal board time, for instance, that we used to get, and where it doesn't turn into another meeting. So I don't know. But if you do know, Claire, Julia, please tell me.
Well, Michelle's got her hand up, so
I will say I don't know the answer to the last question, but I just wanted to touch base on the sort of informal catch-up point, the water cooler point around. It may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but one of the things that we've done is to start to I was going to say schedule them in, but that's not what I mean. So we have management programs, for example. We've got sort of lots of programs that run over a period of time. There might be a management matters cafe, and it'll be set up for a short period of time, and you just drop in, see who else turns up. And it's one of those things that I personally missed during sort of remote working in COVID lockdown times is I missed the element of surprise. My whole day was made up of meetings, and I knew exactly what the topic agenda was going to be. And there was nothing around anyone just either sort of popping to your desk or popping to the water cooler and actually just finding out something you didn't know or you didn't plan to know just because of that social interaction. And so it's a way to really try and start building up social capital again, and attaching it to existing programs, for example, or maybe existing groups can have that drop in 15 minutes and see who drops in and see who doesn't. I tend to do them sometimes in sort of broader team meetings, and we'll start 10 minutes early and people just talk about each other and then get on to the proper meeting. But there is a serious point I also wanted to raise around this, and that's proximity bias, and just making sure that we don't sort of end up sort of thinking people are better the more we see of them. So if you do tend to start sort of reverting back to the olden days and sort of going to the office more frequently, for example, and seeing people and sort of equating presenteeism or proximity with better outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Nasa, you've been waiting very patiently. Did you have thoughts on either of these issues? You need to come off mute.
I'm guilty. Yeah, I've got quite a lot, both as a experience as my own employees, as well as what we do for a lot of our clients. There are two things about, firstly, about this cultural thing, about everyone doing what their part. Now that comes from confidence. If you want to change a culture, you've got to organization has to have the confidence to have a conversation about disability. We are all guilty or capable of bigotry and prejudice. That's because of our lived experiences. However, in order to get rid of that, you've got to demonstrate everyone is equal. They're capable. They can be as good. They can contribute. And you can do that if you empower every individual to be their best. And you can't do that unless you have this embracive culture that Andy talked about. Anyone can ask for help. I want to do this job. Can you help me to do it better than I can? Once you get that culture in, the communication is quite loud and clear that we are interested in you. We want you to be your best. And once you get that going, every individual will become embracing that inclusion. They will help, they will support their colleagues. Then getting back to this issue of water cooler moment, you know, we learned something really valuable during the COVID. We wanted to make sure we leave no one behind in our company. I am proud to say more than half of my employees have told us they are disabled. And I'm absolutely proud because they're the best in the world for what they do. So that to me proves that disability isn't a barrier. The confidence we gave them the ability we gave them to be able to be their best is what the key. So when we did, first thing we did, we set up these town hall meetings, once or twice a week meeting. Everyone can participate, all the way from CEO down to the line managers and individuals. They can actually speak freely. We tell them what's going on, kept them informed. And I think at every stage of the way, we learn something new. People are actually, then the light kind of a moment of conversation, there are so many channels of communication. So I know if somebody sends me a message through the Teams, it's business related, then I'll get a message on my WhatsApp. It's a personal, they want to share a moment. And if you get an email, it means you have to respond because it's some sort of a business matter. So you can create that community, whether it's a hybrid or whether face-to-face, that community actually grows and people start trusting each other more. And that's then you get that whole inclusion by the whole community rather than driven by the leadership.
Great, thanks, Nasser. I can't believe how fast the time is going, but we will have time to get in a couple more questions if we keep the answers brief in a moment. But I just want to say to the audience, thank you so much already for sending in so many great questions. If we can't answer them now, we'll make sure they get answered afterwards behind the scenes. So thank you so much for that. We'll be sending you out a questionnaire. If you could take a couple of minutes to send that, it'll be in your inboxes. Please do, because it just means we can keep providing these webinars that are most useful for you. And also, I'm delighted to say that on a webinar that we did last week on disability issues with regard to disability into senior positions, we had Susan Scott Parker, who some people may know. She's founder of Business Disability Forum and Disability International. She's actually shared some of her resources with us that she uses when she supports different organizations around the world, actually. And she shared them with us so that we could share them with you. So we'll also be sending you links to those resources as well. So I just wanted to let the audience know that you'll be getting a lot of material from us, but hopefully it's all very useful stuff. So I'm going to put two more questions to our audience, our panel. And again, you can answer one or both of these questions. We've had one I really like here because it kind of flips things around. This is from Anna Kutseko, I think. And Anna has asked, many organizations are now requiring staff to be back on site 40 to 50%, but they're getting poor uptake. So from a leadership perspective, how can people make on-site more compelling? So I think it's what do people do back in the office to make it more compelling? And the other question I want to ask, because I think this is a bit trickier, is from Manfred. And he says, how does one start an inclusive conversation, especially if the guys in charge, as well as those in the majority, don't see inclusivity as a challenge? So how do you even start if nobody in your organization really is seeing this as a priority for them? I am going to come to Alice first on these questions.
So I will take Anna's. And so there are two things I think I would highlight. The first is that I think if we've been talking about water cooler moments and building social capital and so on, and I think if you can ensure that at least some of that 40 to 60%, you encourage all your team to come in on 20% of it, given that we've got 5 days in a week, then it will be helpful in terms of ensuring that, because then people can talk to each other, they do get those water cooler moments, they can, go out for lunch together, they can actually, and you make sure that when they come in for that 20% or that 1 day a week where everybody comes in, it is actually about team building, not necessarily about sit at your desk and just work, work, work. So that's number one. Number two is, in order to address the concerns that people would have, it's really important to maintain some of the COVID-safe principles that we developed in the first place. So distance, it's okay to distance. If you want your colleagues to wear masks, you should be able to ask your colleagues to wear masks, and those kinds of things, so that people do feel safe when they come in. So those are the two things that I think would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I think that issue around all of the safety kind of precautions around COVID is such a big issue, because the sense that it's all over and everyone can go back to the office. And for a lot of people, that's just not the case. So I think really practical things there. Michelle, your thoughts on kind of making the office environment attractive, but also this question about how do you start a conversation about inclusion when people in your kind of chain of management aren't interested?
So I'll just talk about I liked, Alice, I thought your answer to the last question I thought was exceptionally good around about organizations when they're making people come to the office sort of 40 or 60% and the uptake being poor and what to do about that. I think for us, what I would say is around, this is a really, really tricky question, because I do think there's been a few abortive attempts to come back into the office and then we've gone back into lockdown. And so I think it needs to be worthwhile coming into the office when people do. And I think we've moved on from where we were in the UK over the winter, for example, where you come into the office and we're all still mask wearing and keeping considerable social distancing and basically coming into the office to just be on your computer the whole day. And you thought, well, I could have done this at home, that kind of thing. So it's really that whole piece about really selling what is, and campaigning to some extent is what we're thinking about doing around sort of having this bigger information campaign to remind people about why it's good to use that office space in the office together, and that collaborative working, brainstorming sessions, the social aspect of meeting people, and the surprise that I talked about earlier when you don't know what's going to happen. For some people, actually, the mental health benefits of not being at home as much as other people who prefer to be at home. We're all differing introverts and extroverts, for example, and really selling those benefits in a consistent, concise way, and actually making sure the technology works, really investing to make sure that when you're there, the Wi-Fi, the moving around with your laptops, it's just as good as it would be at home. I think if you get into the office and you have tweaks and things and the tech doesn't work, it's going to be a real impact. But I did like the idea of actually sort of organizing at a team level, sort of saying at an organizational level, you might say, look, we want you to be in 2 or 3 days a week, but at a team level, organizing when those times will be and actually making that time work and seeing who you need to work, and having a computer-free day, for example, and actually have your meetings with people if you can, if that happens to be your team and you've done it from that perspective. So definitely not just thinking organizationally, but also thinking it from a team perspective and collaboratively, coming in collaboratively when you can. I don't know if that actually answers your question, but it's an attempt to try and answer that question. The other piece around people that don't get it, we've tried storytelling from a senior leadership down, and we started this a lot during COVID, actually sharing more of yourself to make it all right, to be able to share, and actually exposing and making people aware of different topics and different impacts on different people, and actually saying it's okay to share of yourself. We've had senior leaders who've shared hearing difficulties, which you would not see, you would not know had they not written a post on our intranet, for example, to share that information. And it's really trying to, and I hate the word, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of another word at the moment. It's trying to sort of normalize the conversation about anything, to get people to just open up and be able to do that. And it's really doing it by example. And I think we've just found storytelling a little bit more powerful to be able to do it. It's a slow burn, but it's working.
Thanks, Michelle. And I've just really great answers there. Thanks, Michelle. I've just realized Lola Lawrence had posted a very similar question around the kind of going back to the office, saying how can we continue to create that safe space for people that have enjoyed a more psychologically safe space while working from home. So not just the physical, psychologically as well. Andy, you wanted to come in, so answer one or both of those.
No, I mean, I totally agree with what's been said. It's about not trying to recreate the past and reverting to type. You know, we need to be more purposeful and plan what we want to achieve. Some of the, I'll go back to the water cooler moments. allowing time in your agenda for what we call checking in, just to chat amongst yourselves about what's going on in your life, or sharing a bit of a story about, you know, the dog needs to go and get its, you know, to the groomers or whatever, you know, things like that. We do things like coffee roulette or virtual coffees. But we want to make, when you're going into site, I agree with that point about going in a targeted way, make it more compelling and enjoyable experience so they want to do it again. Because if it's just a case of going in to sit at your desk alone, not interacting with anyone, you know, that's worse than being at home when you can, you know, interact with people, well, unless you're living alone. But yeah, making it more purposeful, planned, and a little bit fun as well, in that, you know, when we do our scheduled meetings, we spend a bit of time, certainly with team meetings, we spend a bit of time just, you know, everyone sends in a picture and we try and guess, you know, whose window's that from. It's just something to have those informal chats with that we would otherwise have when we go into site. But when we do go in, making it worthwhile and purposeful, particularly, my son's just gone through a university placement in industry. He really wanted to go into the office to interact with people. And they made really great efforts to encourage that in a safe way, because they wanted to learn from each other.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Nasser, your thoughts on making the office space safe, but also those difficult conversations?
Well, actually, we don't have difficult conversations. In our company, you either have to be at work because there's no way you could do it at home, like warehousing and shipping, or you can do it from home. There comes the trust, and there comes a bit of a negotiation. We want to know where you can do your job most effectively, more productively. So if you say, I need to come back to the office because of my mental health, that's acceptable, because we know when you're at home, you're giving me 10 hours of work in 8 hours of daytime. When you come to the office, I'm happy for you to give me 4 hours instead of 8 hours, because you've made it up. So to me, I want to know what makes them better in what they do, how best they can become, and whether it's working from home and from office makes no difference, because we've actually asked people, why do you want to come back to the office? And the same way, why do you want to work from home? It's all about knowing your staff and actually knowing what makes them be comfortable in doing their job. Second part about how do we kind of educate the people who don't get the inclusion. I'm afraid there's only one answer. It's called education, because these people should read about latest best practice management. You know, the most inclusive companies are the most successful ones. This is not about hearsay. This is not about hypothetical theories by economists. It's actually studies by Harvard Business School and the people like Accenture. So if you don't get it, then find out why Steve Jobs became the most successful technology company, because he's designed all his technology around maximum users. The most inclusive way of actually designing your product. The same goes when it comes to diverse way of thinking and working. You become the best in your own industry. So there is no other way of that. Tell that person, please go and study a bit more.
Thanks, Nasser. Luna, we started with you. I'm finished with you. Your thoughts?
All right, thank you. So struggling with my mute button. I agree with everything that everyone has said. I think there were some real nuggets there. One thing I want to add, we need to think about the future is holding other risks of different pandemics or different public health situations, and we need to change the way our organizations think. So what can we do to make the workspace safer for everyone? We can create all kinds of opportunities to stop touching surfaces, for example. We can create all kinds of opportunities for people to have the space to not need to be all piled up in a boardroom. So having the best technology possible to allow people to do that. And I agree so much with the comment about when you come into the office, make it worthwhile, because I've heard so many of my colleagues who came back on the site to say, I feel so much less productive when I'm here than when I am at home. So you need to make it worth it for people. They need to see the value.
Thank you so much, Luna. And thank you to everybody. I'm afraid we are absolutely out of time now, but just to say to the audience, thank you so much for all those questions. I think the level of engagement just shows how many people want to be involved in these conversations. It was wonderful to have such a positive discussion today. Because of this Global Government Forum, we're starting to work with governments around the world to create a global public service disability, diversity and inclusion network. There's going to be a form that we're going to send you on the link. It's also on the events page where you saw this webinar on our website. If you would be interested in being part of that network, please do register your interest and you can develop this with us. So we will be coming to you for your thoughts and ideas, because there's obviously an appetite to share experiences, ideas and good practice on these issues. But that just leaves me a minute to say thank you so much to our fantastic panel today for sharing your expertise and your time with us, to Nasser, to Luna, to Alice, to Andy and to Michelle. Thank you so much. To our wonderful captioner, Tina, who has been working hard, I know today, thank you as well. We will be sending a link with the video of this conversation to everybody who attended and everybody who registered. And also there will be an article coming out to you shortly with issues in the following kind of couple of weeks. So wherever you are, I hope you enjoyed the conversation and hope we see you at one of our webinars again very shortly. Thanks to the panel, thanks to everybody watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.